Hello and welcome to another episode of Fly on the Wall podcast with Josh Hill. I am Josh Hill. Today I've got a very special guest. I'm joined by Ben McEvoy, MD of Digital Directors ANZ, which has changed. It used to be Digital Directors Australia, but we'll come back to that, Ben. Board chair, director, advisor, technologist, all things in between. You had a career in technology leadership before moving into advisory directorships, where you're now spending a lot more time. And you're undertaking something special, a really ambitious project, trying to help uplift the digital literacy at board level with Digital Directors ANZ. ANZ, yeah, let's go with that. Talk to me a little bit more about that. How did we start with Digital Directors Australia when we first spoke to now Digital Directors ANZ?
Yeah, thanks for that, Josh. Yes, look, I actually began with Digital Directors Perth, would you believe?
Okay.
And I thought I'll gather together some people interested in my local community, and that just became Australia pretty rapidly because I spent some time in Sydney as well, and I was reaching out to some contacts there, so that became Australia very quickly. And then in the course of taking it out to the world, our cousins across the ditch, some put their hand up and said, gee, what about a New Zealand chapter? There's a lot of similar issues there. So I sort of looked away for a moment. I looked back and we'd gone international. So Digital Directors ANZ now. That's where we are.
Love it, mate. Let's go back to the genesis. I know that you and I have talked about this before, but what was the story behind this? And you kind of just alluded to it a little bit, but what made you decide that this was something you wanted to do? And for the people that don't know anything about it, tell me a little bit more about the kind of goals and ambitions behind DDANZ.
Yeah, sure. So look, it's born of I'm moving in the directorship space myself. As you mentioned, I'm not doing any executive work anymore. I'm purely working in directorship roles and associated sort of consultancy and advisory. And so that makes me sort of a professional director, I would say. And I had noticed a lack of my technology peer group in directorship circles, and it just sort of occurred to me that that was an interesting thing to observe. And then I thought, well, why is that? And it began to sort of tick away in the back of my mind. And I when you run a portfolio career, you have a little bit of time to invest in passion projects, and my golf handicap came down a little bit, and my tennis serve got a little bit better, and I thought I've got some time to invest in perhaps trying to contribute to whoever it is that's leading the charge for directors with technology backgrounds, and obviously there'll be an advocacy group for that, and I'll just go and invest some time and I'll volunteer my time to that. So I went and looked. And I looked and there wasn't one. And so I turned that over with a few mates, and somebody said, well, you should start one. And I thought, okay, well, let's try that. And I'll see if I can put together 40 people who can validate my idea, because I've had a lot of great ideas on a Friday afternoon at the pub that turn out to be not such great ideas in the cold light of a Monday morning. So I thought if you get 40 different voices who have knowledge of the industry and they kind of validate it and they can give me some guidance on what it should be and what it shouldn't be and where the demand is, then that would convince me that maybe I'll put some time into running something like that. And I thought that'll probably take me about 6 months. I'll have some coffees with some people and I'll have some conversations. Well, it took me about 6 weeks because everybody I called said, absolutely, I'm immediately in, let me sign up. When do we get started? And so it sort of took on a life of its own from there. The next step was, okay, well, when are you going to start bringing this to the world and put it on LinkedIn and start inviting people? I said, okay, I'll do that. And that just went from 0 to 25 to 50 people signing up every week in a very short period of time. So that's kind of the birthplace, and the genesis of it was I saw that there was a need there, and I said, well, let's see if anybody's interested in this, and it turns out, yes, they are.
Just a few people. What are the numbers looking like now?
Look, we've got, because it's been such a rocket ride, really, we've got about 700 people now who are, connected to us on LinkedIn. We've got a variety of different phases then of them being converted into paid members or members who've subscribed to various aspects of the organization. Obviously, we're running our launch events this month. We've moved every single launch event, I think, from our original location to another location because we've been oversubscribed. We were just talking about Sydney. We've got a wait list of 25, 30 people in Sydney, and we just can't move it again. So we'll have to run a second event in Sydney. So, the numbers are big and getting bigger. Every time we reach out to the market and reach more people, what we get back is a bunch of, yes, I'm interested. How can I get involved? So the numbers are getting bigger every day.
Yeah, I think it's really a good reflection of the work that you've done, but also it's a bit sad, isn't it, that you're the first one that went, hey, I'm going to go do this, and look at the response. It's been fantastic. Every time I speak to someone about it, they're immediately, oh, this is such a common sense thing. Why have we not done this before?
Right.
Is it a case for you kind of sitting there having these conversations going, yeah, why didn't anybody do this before?
I mean, I ran some of the strategy at Deloitte, the internal strategy at Deloitte at one stage, and one of my roles there was to look for innovative ideas inside the firm and try and bring them to fruition. And so that helped me to develop a very keen eye for when are we just group thinking ourselves, and and one of the tests is, why hasn't this been done before? If it's such a great idea, lots of people like to think they've got this one unique idea, but probably somebody else has thought of it and it hasn't happened. So why is that? And I think the answer to that in this case is that technology has always been, or for a long time, has been a matter for the board, and boards have grappled with various aspects of technology. But I think there's really two things that have shifted that recently that make this a moment in time where digital directors have their moment. AI is obviously a huge one. So you cannot go to any kind of event involving directorship at the moment without AI being on the agenda. But I think that AI is bringing behind it, or bringing with it, a broader understanding that technology is woven into every aspect of every organization in every modern economy, and probably most of those in other economies. So there is this kind of AI was the Trojan horse to get into the boardroom discussions of things like data sovereignty or data quality or data governance, or there's some legislation coming out around automated decision making. Well, AI kind of leans into that as well. So it's opened the eyes of a lot of boards to the vital importance and the very core nature of digital matters. And it's also, there have been a number of cases, and APRA has written recently about the importance of directors directly owning and understanding those aspects, where in the past perhaps they haven't taken on that. It's been delegated, or a CIO or so on. Now it's very clear directors have to have this understanding, and so now there is a groundswell and a moment in time where digital directors really has its moment.
And what I found very interesting in looking through the group, and there's so much great content on there, is that it's not actually all technical or technologists or digital people. It's actually a lot of people from traditional kind of directors' backgrounds that are also trying to upskill. What's the makeup, and what are you seeing in that regard? What kind of people?
Yeah, look, I was very clear when we started this that although it's called Digital Directors, the tagline is championing digital governance excellence, and there's a very good reason for that. It's not just about getting technology people onto boards, although that's one aspect of what we do. It really is about driving digital governance excellence in all its facets. So having people with very deep technology experience make their way onto boards is a pathway, and we should talk about the challenges that are associated with that. But having what I would call more traditional directors, lawyers, accountants, those people bring into their toolkit familiarity with digital matters, and not just familiarity from a literacy perspective, but I'm talking about going from that to fluency and competence, because I think that surface level digital familiarity now probably is not enough for directors. It would be very hard for a director to say, I don't think that digital matters are important enough for me to have brought myself beyond just passing familiarity with those matters. So we do have a set of traditional directors, and we do have an offering for those to help them to step from wherever they are in their knowledge and understanding of digital matters, bring that skill level up to a deeper understanding, demystify some of those concepts, and help them to have the understanding that helps them to govern well. So it's not an organisation that's exclusively for people with digital backgrounds. We welcome those with digital backgrounds, those with traditional backgrounds equally.
I think it's important as well. I often, and I've had this conversation on the podcast, we also need to meet people where they are and help them on that journey as well. And I think that traditionally, maybe my viewpoint would have been a counter to that, in that I think more digital people, in this sense, the digital term technologists, on the board would be a good thing. But as I continue to have these conversations, and somewhat with the help of your group, I think there is really a place to help people on that journey as well, because otherwise it's going to be quite hard for those digital directors to step up and still get the same results if they're talking at a board where people don't understand what they're saying either way.
Right. Yeah. You're exactly right. And there is, I hear that from some people when I speak to their experience on boards, that they have a skills matrix and they plug that hole in the skills matrix, which is often the one that goes missing, which is, do we have anybody with tech skills? They bring somebody in with those tech skills, and then when the tech topic comes up, they kind of look to the tech director. But that's not how boards should function, right? Everybody should be contributing to the collective decision making on the matters before them, and so having a single director with deep expertise is helpful, but it's not the answer that the board can then sort of delegate that accountability. And I guess that's part of what Digital Directors wants to do as well. So for directors with a digital background who are on boards, I want to empower those people with some skills and some tools and some advocacy and so on to bring the impact of their position on the board up, where they're able to bring to those other members of the boards that they sit on that awareness, and to help them to lift their capability, lift their understanding. So when they, inevitably with term limits and so on, they would leave that board, they leave behind a board that has a broader digital capability, rather than when they leave, the digital knowledge goes with them.
I think the numbers are pretty damning, right? I recite them regularly to pretty much everyone I meet. 7% of board directors are technologists. That could be all plethora of types of technologists, from ERP down. 1%, and this is where I got it from you, 1% cybersecurity professionals.
Yeah, less than 1% actually. Yeah, that was
crazy,
a University of New South Wales survey. Yeah, it's madness. I mean, the comparison, if you look, and I guess we can draw. People ask me, what is the benefit of having people who are digitally savvy on boards? And there's a great study from MIT that shows that digitally savvy boards outperform their peers by somewhere between 20 and 40%, right? In terms of ROA, revenue growth, market cap growth, a bunch of other metrics that we can talk about. But 20 to 40% outperformance of their peers by having a digitally savvy board. And 24% of boards met that criteria in the US. This is public markets in 2019. Last year, it was 72% that met that criteria, digitally savvy boards. And that's 3 directors with deep digital competence or expertise. That's how they measure that. In Australia, we can't tell whether we would get those same performance improvements, because not a single ASX company that meets the standard. So, it's an indication of the power of having those people on the board that goes beyond just having digital knowledge, but the way they think and the way they engage with the modern digital era, which is, what we're all experiencing, has those impacts on the organisational performance.
It's so funny. You actually made a point I was going to make. We would have no idea whether that would work here, because I don't think even one board that I can think of off the top of my head would meet the criteria.
I mean, there are. Sorry, I don't want to talk over you. So there are boards in the tech index, the ASX tech index, that don't have anybody with tech expertise on
them. I'm laughing, but it's not funny, isn't it? Right. It's a real gap.
Go and look at the board of the NBN, right? The board of the NBN has 6 accountants and 1 lawyer. Now, I say accountants, but accountants or commerce background people, right? And 1 lawyer, the largest technology infrastructure project in Australia. and there's nobody who is a deep technology expert, studied computer science, has been involved in building technology systems, is an engineer by background. There isn't a single one of them on that board. There's, I made the joke the other day, obviously the selection panel looked at the 5 people with accounting background or commerce background that they had when the spare role came up, and they said, we've got 5, but it's just not enough to have 5. We better just make sure we've got a 6th there to make sure we've really got that covered. And there's definitely no room for anybody with knowledge of technology. That's not necessary. We really need to prioritize getting that 6th person with that same accounting, commerce background on there to fill the gap. So, yeah, there's an orthodoxy that drives that kind of thinking during nomination and selection, board selection.
I want to come back to that point because that's something I want to touch on in a little bit more depth. So no telco professionals on the telco board.
Yeah, look, I don't want to be too prescriptive about that. There are people who have experience in telcos, so they have worked in telco companies, and they have experience of being in certain roles inside telco companies. So it's not that they don't have any background in the industry. What they don't have any background in is the technology of the industry. So in the same way that I could go and work in a hospital and build technology systems inside a hospital, but I wouldn't call myself a doctor and I wouldn't say I'm an expert in health. I may know something about health because of my touch points with the health industry, but I wouldn't say that I have that deep, expertise is the word that we use in that industry. And it cuts the same the other way, right? So they may have worked in telcos, but they've certainly never been deeply involved in implementing technology themselves.
A rather significant gap
Right.
between doing one and doing the other. Please don't pick up a scalpel anytime soon.
Yeah, not planning to. I mean, it's a just to push on that point a little bit, Josh. It's a distinction that was crystallised in the Sarbanes-Oxley changes that happened after the 2008 financial crisis. Certain functions of boards now, listed boards in the US, require a financial expert, and it's defined in the Act. That person must have deep expertise in certain aspects of accounting standards and so on in order to function in particular roles in audit committees. And there's a reason for that. They recognise that directors who come onto boards and say, yes, I have financial literacy or I have financial competence, that's all well and good. But there is a distinction between people who have that literacy and competence and somebody with very deep expertise of those and knowledge of the detailed elements of that particular discipline. And that's the distinction that we're talking about here.
Makes perfect sense. How much of this gap and those numbers and everything there that we've seen, which, again, is laughable, but sadly not funny, do you think is down to the fact that we, and I'm going to use we as the technology digital world, aren't in those conversations already or don't know how to have those conversations? How much of that is on us, if you will?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of elements to that. When I speak to members, it's helped to crystallize my thoughts around this and feedback and what I hear. So I think there's a couple of things. The first is that technologists probably don't think about directorship as a career trajectory for them in the same way that accountants or lawyers or others in that industry, the business side of things might. And they're not having the conversation. They're not at the business lunch. They're not at the business forum. They're not at those events. So they're not making the kinds of associate or sort of connections with decision makers that may be useful or that may lead towards being asked to consider a directorship somewhere. So the first thing is that a lot of technologists don't even think about it. They just think CIO, CISO, CTO. These are, I'm in the C-suite, great. I'll do that, and that's maybe I'll retire at some stage and I'll start a startup. That's really how technologists think. They don't think about directorship necessarily as a pathway. So I think there's a self-selecting element to it. I think the second piece is, the opportunities aren't coming to them, so not having the conversation. there's a business conference and then there's a tech conference, and often the participants in those two are self-segregating, and so the rubbing shoulders with a chair at the table that you were put on at the forum event, you don't get a chance to have that conversation and say, hey, I'm a technologist, I'm interested in directorship, and maybe let's have a coffee in a couple of months' time and begin a conversation that might at some stage lead towards those opportunities. We're just not in the room. There is a stereotype about technologists being bad communicators, and I think there is something to that. I've managed and led teams, large teams of technologists for most of my career, and I can tell you that stereotype exists for a reason. I make the joke that when you've got a techie who's a bit of an extrovert because he looks at your shoes when he's talking to you rather than at his own. So there's an element to that, and I think part of what Digital Directors is doing is we have some coaching and we have some training and mentoring that we make available to members to help with learning the skills of good communication, to learn the skills of storytelling, collective decision making, some of those things that don't come naturally to people who are problem solvers by nature, solution focused, very technical in the way that they address problems, helping them to lift up to that director mindset. So there is a bit of that. I wouldn't say it's everyone. There's a bell curve, of course, and some people are very good at speaking and communicating. Others are less so. But there's how much of it is us. There are reasons why that technology backgrounded people are underrepresented, and it's not just that the orthodoxy is keeping us out of the boardrooms. It's that we're perhaps not banging on the door until now as loudly as we might.
So I'm going to be the one to completely agree with you, having interviewed thousands, if not tens of thousands actually by this point. I think that if you're not in the room, and particularly those rooms, it can be very difficult. I think technologists and what I'm seeing, the evolution over the last few years is that they're getting more business savvy. The CIO, I think, is the future CEO, and I think that leads generally to a portfolio career down the line. These kind of conversations have never been something that they've thought about before. And to your point, executive storytelling, they just don't do it. They just don't do it.
There's also tough. A bit of, sorry, go on, Josh.
After you.
I was going to say there's also a bit of an orthodoxy to communication styles in the boardroom. So there's a certain adherence to a particular form and nature of conversation and discussion and debate that technologists, when they step into those spaces, although what they have to say might be valuable and important, it's how they couch it. It can provoke a kind of allergic reaction from those others around the table. There's a lot of discussion about DEI and diversity and being inclusive and so on. And I think that technologists have to come some way towards being more in line with the expectations around communication styles in boardrooms. But I think also we could ask others in the boardroom, what is it about the communication style of that person that you're finding so challenging that it's turned you off and he's lost you, a few words in? Certainly where it's jargon and it's very technical and so on, I understand that. But technologists also often speak in objective terms, and they're much more interested in the truth, and they're much more likely to pursue that in an intellectual way rather than in a subjective or inclusive way. And I actually think that that's quite refreshing. Sometimes having a techie come, I remember managing large teams and having a graduate come up to me and say, you're doing this wrong and here's why. Because they don't have the same kind of respect for those hierarchies, because for them, the objective truth is the most important thing. And if I know what the objective truth is, then it gives me the power to go and deliver that truth to whoever that might be, because aren't we all here seeking the truth? And the reality is that in many conversations, it's not about seeking one particular truth. It's about seeking a consensus or finding different lenses of opinions around a particular subject. And so that can be jarring in a boardroom, but I think it has its own value if we're able to sit and let that style of conversation come to us and take out of it the value that's available inside that.
I'll often say to executives who are starting to have this thought process around what's next to them, obviously as part of their longer term goals, it's important to sit and understand the way that these the kind of people think and operate, and it's not the same as the way that you do by design. They're not meant to be the same. That's kind of the way it's meant to be. But also, you think that you, being technologists, generally think that our problem's the biggest one. This cyber problem's the biggest one. But if that director's sitting there worrying about liquidity, running out in the next 30 days, that's a bigger issue than cyber. These sorts of things, that bigger perspective is something that people in technologists, I find, often struggle to adapt to as well, before all the reasons you just mentioned there as well. Because of all those reasons, I think that we are conditioned to be a very specific way, and it takes a bit of unconditioning to get them speaking to other people. And that's even at executive level, I think.
Yeah, look, you're totally right. And there are part of what we do at Digital Directors as well is helping the technology executives to map out their knowledge space and map out the skill sets that they have. Surprisingly, once you actually begin scratching the surface on it, a lot of these technologists do have risk management, experience in legal or contractual negotiations, managing large budgets, managing people. So they do have a range of these skills that are important at the board level. Commercial outcomes, particularly people who have built products, those people are very conscious and aware of marketing, commercial outcomes, a whole bunch of things associated with that. So they can have quite broad skill sets, but they're sort of T-shaped, where they have that broad understanding, but they focus very much on their technology background. So the advice, of course, is to go and lean a little bit more into building that broader portfolio of skills out, because that's really what the board is looking for. And we hear that objection from executive search groups are very, very focused, very narrow understanding of one specific technology. That's a criticism that I think can be levied against some people. But I think if the technologists themselves take the time to look at their history and experience, often they do have these elements in their history and experience, but they're just not used to bringing those front and center as part of the value proposition.
You've nailed it. You've nailed the problem. I find is that when technologists get to these discussions, they're talking a different language. And you said it before, if they're not able to translate that back to board or governance or risk, even though they might know those things, you can very quickly lose a room. And, we end up with another accountant on the board and not the person that's a little bit different to what we're used to. It's human nature, unfortunately. Yep. How do we get around that? We talked about kind of the committees before and that kind of thing, and there'll be a lot of people that have listened to this who don't necessarily understand that process. What does it look like when you're sitting there trying to add someone onto the board, and how do we go about helping increase the odds, shall we say, for those of us with different backgrounds?
So I think there's a self-reflection process that is kind of where that starts. So if you're thinking about directorship and you're thinking about making that step into a governance role, you really do have to understand what you're signing up for. And that value proposition shift, people will pick up their CV and say, oh, my CV is what I'm going to use to go and apply for board roles. And that just belies a misunderstanding of what a board is looking for and how they're going to assess candidates. So there is a transition from, and all directors have to do it to some degree, from thinking like an executive and then thinking like a director. So how do we give ourselves an outsized chance of being selected? I suppose there's a few things. So the first is, as I said earlier, going back and looking through your history and seeing where you've touched on governance matters that are relevant to boards, things like risk management and commercial management of financials, contact with regulatory bodies. All of that is to the good when you're putting your case forward. I think that adding a digital flavor that's relevant to a board context, I like to say, I think it was Stephen Hawkins, when he was dealing with his editor for A Brief History of Time, the editor said, for every equation you include in this book, the readership will halve. And so you have to remove he had a bunch of equations through it, and he removed all except for E equals MC squared. He said, I'm willing to pay half the readership to have that one still in there. And so it's similar on your CV. However many three-letter acronyms you've got in there, the attention of the board is going to halve for every three-letter acronym you have. So there's a shifting from that technology being and familiarity with skills and technical elements being important to what actual value does that translate into at a board level. So don't talk about the technology of cybersecurity talk about the risk mitigation of your cybersecurity experience, for example. So reframing in that way, and that can really actually be a differentiator, because it means that if you're able to tick the boxes across the other elements that a board's looking for, then that technology skill can actually be a differentiator. And it's often unmet on boards where they have a skills matrix and they're looking for somebody with your skill set, but you have to get all of the rest of them to even get a look in, and then the technology gets you over the fence. So that's a great way to think about it and give yourself an advantage over other candidates, is to match them in the other criteria and then use your technology expertise as a differentiator to put yourself ahead of the pack.
Foundations are still foundations though, right? Everyone needs to have them regardless of the background.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I get it. You've alluded to what has happened in the States, and I didn't know the numbers were that good. I know they were massive, but I didn't realize they were that much of an increase. How much do you think we're going to see this change, and be it as a direct result of the great work you're doing, or in general as a bit of a groundswell coming through? What do you think the future, like the next 5 years, looks like for not only digital directors but also the makeup and composition of boards in Australia?
It's hard to say, but I like the fact that the response that we get is so clear, not just from people with digital backgrounds, but from non-digital directors that I speak to, who say, yes, there absolutely is a demand, and some who even admit to being nervous on their boards because they don't have that skill in the room. So I think that there is a demand. Now, there are still boards where I've had conversations and I've heard said, one chair I spoke to recently who said there's absolutely no place for technology people on the board. And so there is still an orthodoxy that's resisting that. And there are parallels to the kind of Women on Boards journey. Women on Boards celebrating 20 years this year have done, just absolutely amazing work. It's slightly coincidental that when they began in 2006, the percentage of representation of women on boards across Australia and New Zealand was less than 8%. It's about where we are today. So they have a different journey, obviously, and for different reasons, but we would hope to see that percentage move. I think that the proximate goal is to have a person with deep technology expertise on every board, as soon as that can possibly happen, and that's about a 15%. If you think boards are about 7 members on average, maybe we would target a 15% target. I hope we can get there a little faster than Women on Boards 20 years later. There's still some resistance and there's still some more change that needs to be made, but with a more proximate goal of 15%, and with the tailwinds of AI and a lot of the digital disruption conversations that are happening at the moment, I think we can get there a little sooner than 20 years' time. That's my hope.
I certainly think so. I think that, every catalyst, it's a perfect storm of things moving in the right direction. And you're right, it's fantastic to see increased representation from women on boards, because it's such an important piece, right? To the same reason, if you don't have different perspectives, you're kind of missing what is a massive problem there. You're not seeing the whole picture. Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the things that really helped with the Women on Boards initiative was that when regulators began to take a position, so the if not, why not idea of if you have a board that is entirely men, you maybe need to explain why that is still the case. That was a big trigger and a big fillip to the success of Women on Boards, I think. Along with a broader recognition, as you say, in the broader public, that this is just a very archaic way to think that you could just have nothing but men on boards and men will select men, and that'll just perpetuate itself forever. So those sort of break glass moments where regulators began to make noises about that, I think those are really helpful. And we're starting to see that from regulators at the moment, from ASIC. Joe Longo gets up and reads our manifesto out every time he possibly can. He says, we absolutely need more people with STEM skills, particularly technology skills on boards. He says there's not a single material matter before boards today that doesn't involve digital technology. And he links it to economic performance. He says that the lack of technology expertise on boards is connected to our poor growth, and we have a productivity commission that's produced a series of reports on that. there's an entire volume on digital elements, and every other volume is scattered with, digital and technology considerations as foundational. So the messages at the moment from regulators and from government and from various aspects are, gee, you should really start doing this now. APRA released a note recently saying if you're taking a vendor's recommendation on AI and copying and pasting and saying, yep, that'll do us, you're not exercising good due diligence as a director. And they said that they're seeing a lot of that, and it's very clear language that that's not acceptable anymore. So we're starting to get the same kinds of signals from regulators and so on in regards to technology expertise as what we had seen previously in regards to gender diversity. But I think it's only going to get more strident. There are some ADM automated decision-making legislation that comes into effect in December this year, for example, and there are implications to that for probably almost every organisation. A lot are going to update their privacy statement and go, okay, we've sorted, no problem. But the reality is that is not true, and directors they're on notice that they have a direct personal accountability to understand how automated decision making is being used in their organizations and to govern it effectively. And updating a privacy statement does not meet that criteria. So if you are not able to understand how automated decision making works because you're not willing to engage with understanding digital and technology concepts and principles, well, you're putting yourself at risk, and the regulator is telling you that. So I think we're going to see those regulatory burdens start to drive uptake, not just of directors with digital backgrounds, but also uptake of upskilling for traditional directors who are feeling like, oh, I'm a little bit nervous about this, and I really need to get my competence up to a level that's appropriate for modern directorship.
Now, obviously, we're both heavily biased. But why would any reasonable, sound, well-meaning and board acting with a fiduciary responsibility, why would they not look at this as a positive thing to help them navigate the changes of the world? What's the pushback? I mean, that comment from the chair just dumbfounds me, but sadly doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, so I think it's an orthodoxy, Josh, is the answer. There's when you thought about things in a particular way and with a particular lens for long enough and been around people who speak that way and think that way and so on, then this is why diversity, equity, and inclusion are important things, is because it's very difficult to break into the mindset of that groupthink, right? So there's a perception, I think, amongst a certain cohort of directors and chairs and so on that would say technologists are single-skilled people. So I was at a forum not too long ago where addressing important matters for directors, and we had presenters stand up and talk about AI and talk about cybersecurity, talk about digital disruption, and talk about cyber is the number one risk, digital disruption is the number one opportunity. All of these things very important for directors. Sat down for the Q&A session, and the question came from the audience. So given that you've just said all of these things are super important, what do you think about bringing people onto the board with more technology skills? And the answer that came back from that stage was, oh no, we wouldn't want to bring a technologist into the board. They're just single skilled people. You need a director that's got a broad sense of governance matters, and so we couldn't bring a technologist, even though all of those matters are important, and we've just stood up and told you for 2 hours that they are. No, there's no place for technologists on the board. So there's this, I use the phrase, I steal it from George W. Bush, actually, the soft bigotry of low expectations. So there's a certain cohort who have had engagement with technologists over the course of their career as a cost center and a very tech-focused admin function that keeps the email turning up and keeps the Wi-Fi working, right? And so because of their low expectations of that cohort of people in being able to step into or understand governance matters, they're applying that bias to their selection criteria, and they think, gee, we're much better off going to get an accountant who's worked in a technology firm and have them cover off the technology piece than we are trying to find a technologist who might understand the other governance matters. So that's just a perception issue, and women on boards face the same issue, and people with culturally and linguistically diverse people face the same kinds of challenges. So it's just a challenge of perception, and the pushback isn't, I think, one of I don't think it's necessarily discriminatory. It's just one of naivety that there are technologists are exposed to, by their very nature, often a huge range of aspects of business. Myself, my own background, when I look at building software for banks, for healthcare, for government, I've stepped through many different industries in various different aspects, and I've learned an incredible amount of different things because technology is everywhere. And there are a lot of technologists who have that really broad skill set and really broad set of experience and background, and they're stuck behind this expectation that all technologists are admin people on the help desk that I call to get my email fixed. And that's just an experiential challenge, I think.
I'm not saying that they're all ex-CFOs in that cohort, but I'm also not saying that at the same point. It's a challenge as old as time for technologists, isn't it? And it's sad that it's now moved up to the board as well. Well, I think, look, you're doing amazing work in terms of changing that perception. And, we're heavily biased, but we're having conversations with amazing professionals every day who are going to make boards a better place. What does success look like in your mind in, 3 to 5 years? I know these things kind of taken off for you, but where would you like to see Digital Directors ANZ now focused on in the next period of time when we next have this conversation, hopefully?
Yeah. Look, I guess, Josh, at its highest aspiration, Digital Directors actually is here to assist with economic outcomes for the country, right? We look at the GDP growth. We've had a productivity commission report come out. There's some pretty damning statistics about our economy, and I present some of those at the launch event here in Perth recently, where some of them are quite shocking to people who hear them for the first time, right? So our economy, there's a measure of economic diversity, right? It's a globally measured index. 145 countries get measured. Where do you think we would rank as a modern Western democracy of Australia? We feel like we're a very modern economy. We feel like we're very, that measure of complexity is really a measure of innovation and how much high value things we do. Countries that rank highly, like Japan and Germany, for example. Most people would think, we're probably in the top 20, 30, something like that. They're very surprised when they hear that we rank 105th on that index, right? Just behind Botswana, right?
So the powerhouse that is.
Right, Botswana. Right. Botswana powerhouse who 70% of their economy is exporting diamonds, and another 15, 20% is tourism, right? And we're behind them in terms of economic complexity and advancement. Right. That's a really damning statistic that tells us that this kind of pit and farm economy that we're running, it has telling signs of not being prepared for the digital age, and we've recently seen some buffeting from the global economy. Well, we're pretty vulnerable to that buffering. I remember the campaign some years ago trying to transform our thinking from being the lucky country to being the clever country. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but there's that same mentality that still exists today, right? And when we go and look at things like digital competitiveness, for example, again, if I said there's a index of 69 major economies that have been indexed for digital competitiveness, where do you think we would rank? Well, in this case, we would, again, we might say top 20 or so. We're 23rd on that index. But we're 23rd overall because we have very good credit rating, and we have very strong democracy, and we have access to technology, and we have high adoption of things like mobile phones, and so that kind of brings our ranking up. Once you drill down underneath that into elements of that index as an average, the elements like deployment of capital towards digital innovation, well, we go from 23rd in the top third to 46th in the bottom third, just ahead of Botswana. Actually, they're 47th, right?
There you go.
And when we look even deeper into, if you want to connect it to board matters particular, the element that is most aligned with the importance of the board is business agility. It measures things like the ability to identify opportunities and threats, and flexibility of business, how quickly we adopt technology. And we go from 46th to 53rd once you just look at business agility, right? Botswana, by the way, is 45th, so they're well ahead of us on that measure. And on opportunities and threats, we're 57th, so even worse. And on that adaptability and flexibility, we're 65th. So we're almost at the bottom of those rankings once you drill into those elements that are driven by the board. So at our highest aspiration, digital directors and the education and assisting traditional directors to build their digital capability is about reversing the trend of our GDP growth, which is at the worst level it's been since you and I were born. It's the lowest level it's been in 60 years. This is the digital age, and we are getting left behind. Joe Longo gets up and says that we're in danger of being left behind because we don't have enough technology expertise and now in our boardrooms making those investment decisions because they're comfortable and confident to do those things and to drive those initiatives. Where would we like to be in 3 to 5 years' time? Well, I'd like to say that digital directors and digitally savvy directors are contributing to investment decisions, are contributing to the adoption and adaptation of technologies for the benefit of the Australian economy and New Zealand's economy as well. They have similar challenges, and we start to see that GDP growth turn around. We start to see productivity lift. The Productivity Commission made the point, Australia's productivity is connected to the economic prosperity of every single citizen. So I'd like to say that we are able to draw a line between more of our members being on boards and contributing to those decisions, more people welcoming in digital matters as a core foundational part of directorship and not an also ran that gets added on afterwards, and that has material impact on the health of the economy. That's really what we're here to do.
It sounds lofty, but it's so easily attainable in the sense of everything you've just mentioned there. I'm sadly not surprised, right? And I'm sure those numbers were before, I'm not going to say hostile budget, but I'm not going to not say hostile budget towards innovation and startups at the same point. We won't go down that path. We don't have time for that. But yeah, that's a whole other one.
Yeah, we're ranked 40th for venture capital at the moment. So let's see where that goes, which direction it goes in. Yeah, that'll be interesting.
I have a few friends in that space, and they all seem to like the photoshopped elbow photos. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes, I love your new business partner.
That's it. I love the ideals. I think you've got a really great but very attainable pathway to making an impact, and I can see why that energizes you so much. Anything that you'd like to share? Final thoughts? Anything else that we've not covered here? I think it's been a wide-ranging and very informative discussion. But anything else you'd like to add?
I guess just a couple of things. I would say that we welcome all members, as you mentioned. We're a social enterprise, so we are not in the business. We are not here to make a whole bunch of money. We're not a consultancy. We are a social enterprise. We're membership-based social enterprise. So everything that we do right now is in the interests of our members and in promoting digital governance excellence. So we will welcome in members with digital backgrounds. We are trying to find more of those digital executives who have the capability to step into directorship and welcome them into the world of directorship and demystify that for them and help them think about that as a career pathway. So if you are a digital executive and you're interested in that as a pathway, we can help you. Come and sign up, and we've got a program that can help you to begin your journey and to investigate that as an option for yourself. If you're an established digital director who's already on boards and you have that deep technology expertise, we want to amplify your impact. We want to amplify your voice. We want to get you on speaking opportunities. We want to promote you. We want to, if you're seeking positions that require election, we want to support you. So for those who are already in place, we want to, as I say, amplify the impact of those people who are already there, who can then obviously have that impact on the boards that they're sitting on and the other directors in the tables that they're sitting at. We think that that's really important as well. And then if you're a traditional director who is they tend to fall into two categories. There are some that are very nervous who say, gee, this tech stuff, I just don't get it. And I'm a little bit afraid to ask questions at the boardroom table. How do I get over that initial hump of, I don't really want to ask what a cloud is because I don't know. Could somebody explain it to me? You're very welcome. We've got a place for demystifying and doing that in a way that welcomes in, we're all naive of something in this world. And so we want to help people to overcome that initial hurdle. And then those who are traditional directors, but who are very competent and have had experience in those with some of those topics, we want to help you to get that really deep experience of the underlying concepts and the foundations that drive good governance and decision making. So we have a masterclass that can help with people to step that level of their knowledge up to where they really can say, yeah, I'm an expert in this now, and I can really drive good decision making and contribute to that in the boardroom as well. So the answer is we have a very broad church, and we welcome in all members of all different shapes and sizes and backgrounds and expertise. It's not exclusively for people with digital backgrounds. Come and be part of this mission to improve Australia and New Zealand's economic fortunes and be part of bringing governance into the digital age.
Fantastic. Ben, you're doing amazing and important work. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for taking the time. This one's going to go out, I think, just in time of the launch. And I'll see you next week for the first launch in Sydney.
Lovely. Looking forward to seeing you in Sydney. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.